Well, welcome everyone to a very brief overview of AI alignment. When I say very brief, I really do mean very brief. I decided to try to target 1 hour as opposed to 1.5 hours in the interest of all of your time and having time so that you can go to lunch before noon. And then I thought back to many of the talks that I really enjoyed in the past, and those talks largely had a lot of audience questions. So I decided to instead make my talk about 20 minutes and hope that there would be about 40 minutes worth of questions. So unless you guys ask some questions, I will either be up here for an exceedingly short period of time in a way that's going to be embarrassing, or I will be rambling a lot. That'll also be embarrassing. So please, lots of questions, it'll help. So I'm going to be talking about AI alignment. I think this is very important, if not the most important problem in the field. Well, maybe not alignment specifically, but safety generally. And yeah, before we get started, I just want to make a quick note that this talk will not be advancing through the slides. That this talk is going to be drawing heavily on a paper called Unsolved Problems in ML Safety, came out last year, by Dan Hendricks and collaborators. This paper is extremely helpful when it comes to understanding the different parts of safety, and I'll be following the structure laid out there quite closely, using many of their better analogies, and just generally draw on it quite heavily. So if ever I say something that seems clever and pithy and insightful, assume it came from these guys. And when I screw up, you can probably assume that that's me. So this is the part of the talk where I show you a bunch of graphs where the line goes up and try to convince you that AI is important. I'm sure this is very, very critical to do to a room full of AI researchers. This is hiring trends over time, and you can sort of see that it's increasing very quickly over the course of a few years. But it's maybe not too important to get into the specifics. Suffice to say, there's lots of people being hired, lots of people being trained, faculty, students. There's lots of money going into industry, both as investments into startups as well as larger and larger exits. There is an increasing amount of AI companies. There's an increasing amount of fields where AI is being used. The story right now is sort of growth. And if you sort of believe that your research is has some sort of real world end case or is going to be beneficial to people in some application, then this is good. This means that over time, as more and more people do research, as more and more companies develop products, the world will become a better place. And it's getting faster over time. This sort of seems like a good thing. Let's look at some specific applications, which again is going to require you to click as opposed to say story, I guess. So some specific stuff. We have the Open Climate Fix, which is a sort of research group that recently has deployed solutions, AI solutions in the UK national grid. They try to predict what sort of cloud cover there will be on a given day, usually an hour ahead of time, as much as 24 hours ahead of time, to predict how much they need to run coal plants. Of course, coal plants, not great for the environment at all, but really good at producing energy when energy is needed. So if they can predict that today is going to be a sunny day, they don't need to run the coal plants as much. But if they predict that today is going to be very cloudy, then run the coal plants, produce the electricity. And the result of this sort of deployment of AI in the electric grid is that electric prices are cheaper and there's less need to run coal plants, so less pollution. Likewise, there are lots of companies exploring AI drug discovery. There have been a few successful funding, and I think notably 2 successful exits of AI drug discovery companies that are using AI tools to try to predict how proteins fold and like what sorts of proteins will be useful for certain applications. And of course, if you have ever done online shopping, then you know that sometimes things are out of stock. And AI tools are being currently used for grocery online shopping, which is particularly critical because you need to decide when to buy stock. If you don't buy stock in time, then you'll be out of stock. But if you buy too much, then your stock goes bad, and then you're losing product. So if you sort of buy your groceries online, if you take medicine, or if you use electricity, AI is already affecting the way that you interact with the world. AI is already like pervading into these systems that you are using frequently. So what are the consequences of failure? If AI fails to manage the electric grid, then prices go up, or because there's no supply, or there's too much supply, the coal plants are being run too long, there's excess pollution. And that's maybe like a more mundane failure of just this system failing in the way we expect it to. In a worst case, we might expect loss of electricity to critical functions, such as, I don't know, life support in hospitals. Likewise, you might expect something that performs well in mice, a drug, but then when deployed to human trials, you see 100, 1,000 people take it, and then you get catastrophic results, very bad health effects. And of course, it goes without saying that empty grocery shelves are sort of a typical demonstration of dysfunctional governance everywhere. It's sort of a mark of systematic collapse. So AI is being deployed a lot, everywhere, in a way that could be very good. But anywhere that it's being deployed, the more it's deployed, the more power it has, the more potential for good it has, the greater the downside is. Okay, so there's a lot of risk that comes with deploying AI, and we really hope that this risk doesn't come to pass because we really want AI tools to make the world a better place. Broadly deployed, consequences of failure to be catastrophic. We want the world to be a better place, but we have to understand that, well, it's not likely, but if everything fails at once, the potential end result might be worse than if there had never been AI tools at all. And along those lines, I do want to say that keeping these AI safe for deployment is sort of an inclusive definition. Anything that helps AI systems be more safe in the real world should count as safety. And this talk is going to focus most of all on value alignment, but other things such as robustness of systems or fairness, things that we already see a lot when it comes to how do we ensure that self-driving cars are reliable, how do we ensure that hiring decisions and loan decisions are made in an equitable manner. These are all forms of safety that affect how we deploy AI in the real world. And any understanding of safety should just be rooted first and foremost in the real question of how do we keep things safe? How do we make sure that everything is working correctly? And yeah, maybe this is like a little personal, but my pitch to the room, maybe to the world in general, is that more people should be working on things that are safety in the sort of inclusive sense of anything that helps things be deployed better as safety. I think maybe like a quarter to a third of all AI researchers should be working on this, and the reality is nowhere near as much. So I don't know, maybe you specifically can consider working in safety. What do you say?
I'm excited to hear more about
it. Yeah, so we'll briefly cover some things which should definitely count as safety, but are not going to be talk about this talk. We have like robustness, that is the ability for AI systems to resist unusual circumstances, perhaps is a way to put it. This is very well defined in the literature already in various ways, and there's various approaches to it. I'm just going to point out a safety failure here, which is the 2010 flash crash. Some algorithmic traders saw prices falling, and then they sold their stocks, which caused the prices to fall farther, which made them want to sell their stocks more, which made the prices fall further, which made them want to sell more. And this was a whole thing in which trillions of dollars of market value was wiped out in the matter of minutes. And as you can sort of see, the volume of trades rapidly increases, the price of the value rapidly decreases, and this is all driven by algorithmic traders. Humans had no input in this decision. And this is just sort of an unexpected failure. We didn't know this was going to happen. We sort of thought all these algorithmic traders would be safe. But maybe part of the issue here is that the distribution changed over time. The algorithmic traders were traded on a different market. They were traded in a market with fewer algorithmic traders because they weren't in the market yet. And when they entered the market, that changed the distribution, and as a result, there was a failure. And of course, this distributional shift can be self-induced. The algorithmic traders could make decisions that change the market, that then make them worse at making decisions. So robustness, of course, is a very hard problem. Questions? This is the part where you ask a question. So another sort of robustness is robustness to adversarial attacks. You've all seen this sort of image where you take a normal looking image, you add some noise, then you output a completely normal looking image, the same image pretty much, that has a different classification. I think the standard one you see all the time is panda and then given with some kind of noise. And of course, this is very important. I remember one paper which 3D printed an adversarial turtle, which if you took it around to vision systems, they would identify it as a rifle instead of a turtle. And This is particularly important for any vision system deployed in the real world, but it's important to consider that adversarial attacks may not come through this sort of paradigm where you're adding some sort of noise that lends itself to some like epsilon, epsilon change and so on. Like adversarial examples could instead be finely tailored T-shirts that are fashionable, but and are specifically made to resemble traffic icons, but are not really normal. Should self-driving car stop when it sees a guy walking with a stop sign? Should it stop when it sees a stop sign on like a arm of a train stopping that's raised 90 degrees? How about if there's a traffic worker who has a stop sign and a go sign, and he holds up the stop sign, then he lowers it to hold up the go sign, but the stop sign is still there and visible. Like there's lots of cases where you might see a stop sign that doesn't actually mean stop. And recognizing this is maybe like an example of adversarial. There's some primitive inputs that, yeah.
How can you be robust to phenomena that you haven't observed before? So like the previous example with the flash crash.
Yeah.
If something occurred that hadn't occurred before, how can you be robust to it?
That's a great question. How are you robust to black swan events? How can you be robust to things that have never happened before? So this is an open research question. That's the first sort of answer. Maybe, and then you can sort of think, what are some potential answers? Maybe you can say, in the event of seeing something that I've never seen before, always take the box. Does that work? An important part of like thinking about safety is sort of thinking adversarially. Propose a solution and think about how to break it. So there's always producing no ops in the case of a bad result work in general. Any counterexample will do.
What's no op for a self-driving car? Just stop. That's probably not safe.
Yeah, exactly. If you're on a highway and you see something unusual, should you brake? No. But should you just continue at your same speed? No. Should you take your hand off all controls? Probably not. There's not always a safe no. So then maybe what does it mean? Well, what's maybe a good solution if you've never seen the event before? Maybe a solution might be to flag it, to monitor it and like flag a human for intervention if you see something unusual. But for that, you would need to be aware there's something unusual happening at all. And as we know, machine learning models are pretty miscalibrated about sort of their end probabilities. Usually the end result of these sorts of images with the adversarial attacks is that it's like panda 90%, outside noise given 99.9%. And this is not like the correct output probability. Models tend to be pretty miscalibrated about their posteriors that are there. So yeah, we have a solution. Pursue better model calibrations. You can tell uncertainty is low, then determine when you're out of the solution. Any other ideas? Potential solutions? This is, yeah.
Maybe something like domain generalization. So the aim of domain generalization is that you see a lot of domains, like different distributions. And now once you train on a lot of these distributions, now you'll be robust to new distributions that you encounter in the real world. So that's precisely their aim, although it is still far from realizing this goal, but I think like the aim makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And sort of in the spirit of red teaming this, this doesn't like help you generalize to all domains. This just helps you generalize within your training domains. It expands sort of your definition of generalization, but doesn't help you generalize to truly novel stuff.
Sure.
Yes.
To test the solution to this problem is just to go and collect more data, right? Tend to send around cars the whole time. We don't have self-driving elements to it, blank data, detect stop signs, and they have like the active, inactive stuff in their training set.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the computer vision thing, I think that works. You just try and like everything in distribution. I think in general, generalizing to OOD stuff is incredibly difficult and completely contextual.
Yes.
What you should do and what the right answer is. And so I think that, often there's the best strategy you can collect more data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this will definitely help, right? We sort of see in a lot of cases that collecting more data improves generalization in very important ways. But yeah, I think the question still remains, like black swan events. Like something that has never happened before, can you react to it in a effective way?
The answer's probably no.
Well, humans can, right? Humans all the time see novel situations and react to it in a way that seems fairly effective.
But what's your evidence for that?
Let's see. Actually, I think maybe the stock market is a bad example here. But no, actually, this is a great example. After some point, when the trades went super low, and this is like not based on any underlying change in value, humans intervened, overrode the algorithm traders, and then bought prices back up to, well, not the original price, but to like a much more stable, much more sane price. So humans were able to like notice this thing that had never happened before and correct. You have a question?
But I mean, doesn't that happen all the time with human traders too, where the market will crash and then other traders buy back stocks? Like,
I actually don't know, since I haven't been alive in an era when trading wasn't mostly algorithmic. Yeah, I mean, algorithmic traders have ruled the markets for a long time. But yeah, like, for example, if you were driving on the road and you saw, say, like a lion chasing a gazelle, this would not be in your training data for your experience driving anywhere, but you would still have some idea of how to generalize. Come to a slow break, wait for things to pass, lock your doors if the line's getting too close, something like that. And yeah, just in general, humans are sort of doing this sort of reasoning process where you can think about consequences, where you can like model the world around you. That seems to make it easier to generalize to things that have never happened before. Machines can't quite do that yet, but maybe we can be optimistic. Yes.
I think that's a problem with that argument, because I think I wonder about the definition of AI and what you said so far, right? So to me, you could substitute lots of different things instead of the word AI, and it would still be true, all what you said. You could say, you know, statistical modeling or, you know, medicine trials or whatever. You know, all of these things are still valid. So to me, it seems that what we really mean by AI is systems that are sufficiently complex that we don't quite know what they're doing, but they're doing it by themselves.
Right.
So but maybe humans should be intervening, and so, but that's the opposite. so I think I don't think that quite connects somehow. That's
Yeah, I guess I should make things explicit here. Do I think that human brain emulation would count as AI? Probably not. It would probably just count as intelligence. When I say AI, I maybe like broadly mean statistical machine learning, and specifically I'm pointing more at like deep learning, because I work mostly in deep learning, and pretty much every application of AI that I sort of think is exciting, or I think is going to be brought forward in the future, is based in deep learning. For example, the UK power grid thing was based on a sort of transformer model. Yeah, so I don't know, did that clarify at all where I'm coming from?
Saying what Carl said. I mean, there's been automatic control systems for decades.
Yes, yeah.
That aren't based on neural networks, but based on control theory and various things. And the solution there is an insane amount of testing. Now, I have to say, a self-driving car, it's really hard to, test in every single environment. But in airplanes or spacecrafts and things like this, there's a lot of automatic control where there's no possibility or very limited possibility of human intervention. And so everything, I argue, everything you say to do with a neural network or AI applies to automatic control systems as well. And that's been around for decades. And the answer to robustness or whatever is a lot of testing.
Yeah.
Testing in extreme temperatures, extreme situations, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
testing and using very simple models, right? So so there's a lot of applications where you can't use Kalman filters because we don't really understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And the models that we use, we sort of think Kalman filters will trivial, right?
Yeah.
But actually in control, there's a lot of aircraft systems where they won't use Kalman filters, right? Because they're tricky to work with.
That seems like it's very much around, we understand the model well enough that we know exactly where its limits are and can really test those limits. So you can actually target the testing. Whereas with a lot of statistical machine learning, it's just, well, let's just try to test everything because we don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah, that seems about right to me. Like your airplane autopilot is sufficient for the vast majority of cases, and it's sort of self-aware enough to tell when it's getting out of parameters enough that a human overseer needs to take over. And it is required for there to be a human overseer for your airplane like autopilot. You do need to have someone in the cockpit that is like alert all the time. And yeah.
In terms of the testing point, like I think the testing mode, so for me, it's mostly based on the idea that what is the input dimensionality. So for example, if we consider a very limited number of inputs, now we can test like all possible configurations. But what if you have like high dimensional image inputs? Can you essentially test anything that is useful out there? I would say probably no. Like because you can't really generate all possible inputs that are possible to the system. So don't you think that it is also related to the input dimensionality, like other than the complexity of the model itself?
Certainly, obviously, more sensors and more, as you say, higher dimensional sensors is complicated. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't be safe in some environment, meaning even at Heathrow Airport, they have this little self-driving shuttle that takes you from the parking lot, and it's a very constrained environment. There's no other cars on this thing and all of that. So you may say it is safe to deploy under these conditions that we have tested. Google tests their self-driving cars in Arizona where it doesn't rain. The streets are, half a mile wide, very grid-like structure, and where they've mapped everything out extremely carefully. Down to millimeters and things like that. So you can constrain the environment in which the thing works. It's not necessarily a failure that it doesn't work everywhere. You could design a system to work in certain industrial or closed environments where largely things could be.
Sure, but my problem is like, for example, let's say we always tested in Arizona and then it works amazingly well.
Yep.
Now, can you argue that if you just change, like if there's one change in one pixel, it will still remain the same? And I think that's primarily my problem. Like, for example, we can't really argue that at this point.
I agree. You can't guarantee.
So that's like for me, safety is always like worst case rather than the average case. For average case, we already like, for example, all these test cases, they're good. But in the worst case, we can't, like, we don't have any guarantees at this point.
I think another consideration is that there's like the sort of AI growth narrative requires that you deploy things more broadly. So if you can deploy self-driving in the Heathrow Airport, like shuttle buses, can you deploy self-driving elsewhere, where there are cars on the road or where there's like other like pedestrians or some more complexity in the environment? Because that is sort of what we want to push things to. At least in the event of like stock market, you can have an AI that generates proposals on what you should be trading on, but if there's a human in the loop, that introduces latency. So you want to get rid of the human. In general, there's like an incentive towards producing more and more capable AI systems that have less and less human intervention, that accept more and more complexity in the environment, that take better and better actions, that sort of push us away from the paradigm where we can constrain all the variables, where we can test everything. And instead, the paradigms where, yeah, the input is very high dimensional, where, there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of like potential unknown factors in the environment. These are sort of what we want to deal with in the future. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the takeaway that I'm trying to induce here is that robustness is hard, and that if we want to deploy AI systems in the real world, there's a lot of stuff to deal with before we can say that it's remotely close to acting on distribution all the time, or even acting safely off of distribution. Though these are in fact different concerns. Episode actually will. What are some failures? MNIST is an extremely easy data set. And on MNIST, the best model that I was able to find online, it's Google, has a 99.91% test accuracy. This is really good. And the ones that it gets wrong are really weird, like this 7 and this 4, which clearly look like a 1 and a 9. So say you design a controller for a nuclear power plant, or say an airplane, or some other high impact task like air traffic control, and 99.91% of its control actions are correct. Is this acceptable? That's not really acceptable.
Well, it might be. Again, people design automatic systems all the time, and they decide what is acceptable for a certain environment and a certain use. And you're right, a vision system for a nuclear power plant, I don't know how that would work actually, but might be good enough or not. I mean, you always have design factors. As Carl says, you might not, neural networks or deep learning may not be the right answer for that. A much simpler model may be required that is understood. So
Yes.
you always design a solution knowing what the constraints or the goals are. It's not like saying, oh, vision is only at best 99.91% good, so that may or may not be good for power plants. It's fine. All I'm saying is any safety critical thing, there are specifications usually done long before that said, here are the safety requirements. It must be this reliable, it must have this mean time between failure. It must have this level of precision or accuracy. And AI may or may not fit into that.
Yeah, and it would be a good direction for sort of safety in general if that were something that was that broadly doable. But sort of as I previously mentioned, there are already deep learning based solutions in our power in the electricity that we are using.
And there may be, but they also may be super simple models that do meet whatever the requirements are. I mean, again, especially for utilities and stuff, there are regulations that require a certain level of certainty. And the idea is, it's not like, if you could design a neural network that met those requirements, it would be deployed. If it wasn't, you wouldn't. And I mean, this is in healthcare especially, a lot of models, they just say, look, we're not interested in automatic diagnosis because we don't understand the decisions that are being made, and it's just not done. As opposed to, oh, this is all we have, so we must use deep learning or something. Anyway, my argument is, system designers do think about reliability, and they will choose to use a certain type of model or not, depending on the requirements for safety for that.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that we are blindly careening towards a world where neural nets like control every safety critical infrastructure in the world. Maybe I'm more saying that like the most powerful AI systems that we have right now for like solving complex tasks with very high dimensionality and very complicated control structures do not have this sort of reliability property. And it would be good if we did, because then we could solve harder problems with them and we could make the world like this. In the same way that we're expanding. Yes.
Again, it's like you do this, it's the way you're talking about it, so you do it as this one-shot thing, like, we're gonna go all out, solve the problem in one go with this very sophisticated system. And, the way that John talked about it, like Tesla operate, is they're constantly collecting data, they're constantly identifying failure cases, they're constantly collecting data on those failure cases, they're finding new techniques, they're testing on them, making sure that the accuracy is good, and they're incrementally building a system so that it doesn't have a great coverage over all of the environments and corner cases that people do, and they're slowly, just expanding the envelope and what they can do like that. So it's not a one-shot thing. You're constantly just incrementally pushing the system. So I think
Sure, but at some point you do need to deploy something. At which point it has.
But it's what it is for. These systems are deployed.
Yeah.
So they're doing it under deployment and for a deployed system.
But if it's a real system, it has some data. just sort of fashion.
Sure, and they testify that, you know, so many times better than a human driver. So isn't that a solution? Like deploy something in a narrow domain to start with, a focused domain to start with, and then slowly build out and like.
Yeah, it would be,
Yeah.
at least in as much as like this is possible. Yeah,
Well, I'd say it always goes to requirements. If you need to build a bridge over a big river to carry heavy trucks, that requires a lot of engineering, a lot of safety, and a lot of design. If it's a 1 foot wide puddle, like a piece of wood might suffice. And so someone wrote a little program years ago that predicted which platform the train to London would be on at the Cambridge station. And if that was wrong, it doesn't really matter that much, okay, because you look at the board and you cross the bridge and go to the other track. But as I say, if you're trying to predict something that's life and death critical, a pacemaker or something like that, that has other constraints. And people will not deploy a system that isn't reliable, you know, if it doesn't meet the requirements.
I would argue that that's not true. If you look at like criminal justice things that have large fairness issues, people do deploy systems that are not reliable.
But those are not, you know, those aren't sort of regulated.
But not everything is regulated. We can't regulate every system.
Yeah, no, but
That's not
I'm saying failures, but maybe that should be regulated. Maybe
Possibly.
it should say it must be as good as, you know, this pool of judges or whatever they would have said. But I'm arguing this is not actually a new problem. It's not like, oh, we have this problem because it's AI. We have this problem in every system. Meaning, even you get the email about the, you know, electrical plugs being tested in our offices all the time, right?
Mhm.
It's,
I kind of feel like one of the major differences is that when you're deploying things on a much larger scale, then, like obviously, say for the person coming up with regulations, for example, you have to weigh up, say you have this tail probability that you may fail with 0.05% probability, you need to weigh up the ramifications of that. I feel like when you deploy something at scale, which some of these systems are, that we're kind of seeing a new problem in that the consequences you're seeing are happening on a larger scale. Does that make sense?
you know, and maybe to have an example.
So like,
Even like the train platform example. So if you only roll this out to Cambridge, then you might make 10 students late once a week. And
Yeah.
like the man hours lost there is negligible. But if you roll this thing out to like all of Europe, how many man hours are you losing because people are now running across bridges at the wrong time? I don't know. Like, as soon as you scale anything out, the chances of things falling in the tail probability, just like the sheer number of things that are going to occur in there increases.
Yeah, but that may not cause death or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, this is just running across a bridge, but
But yeah, no, I'm not saying that things shouldn't be regulated. I think things should have a specification, and any system deployed should meet those things. And yes, some program to decide whether you get a bank loan or whether, you know, your criminal justice sentence is long or short.
should be
Yeah.
regulated.
Well, there's, you know, like any engineering system, like building a bridge, there should be, you know, integrity and some sort of goals of how well that works. And as I say, whether it's a machine like a dishwasher that, well, might have AI in it these days, I don't know, or you know, a deep neural network. I'm just saying the same thing. I don't think this is a new problem.
Maybe just not well applied in our field at present.
That, so
Something you think
that is true.
target.
Like civil engineering versus information engineering, I would agree with you.
Yeah, I would say you are right that it would be like, it is very important to test these systems and understand their like limits and their failure cases and all that stuff. In a very real sense, deep learning systems are being deployed, are in the process of being developed. Like people are developing, lots of companies are investing in a system that will be used very broadly in society, potentially, if everything works out. Which And we don't yet know how to ensure robustness, how to notice when you're system scaling. So at the very least, assuming the economic incentives keep this deployment going, assuming that this sort of future is inevitable, it is important that we develop work on robustness to make sure that this inevitable future is a safe one.
No argument.
It feels to me like part of the issue is to even design like the types of tests that John was talking about, you have to have like a pretty fundamental understanding of not really a model of the data that you potentially could see. And so like you were suggesting like, oh, you need robustness to all adversarial attacks, but only like ones that could actually feasibly show up from some data generating process. And that kind of feels to me a bit against the ethos of how a lot of deep learning is done, where it's like, oh, we shouldn't think about the data. We're just going to make this big model, which is something. But I guess I'm having trouble seeing how you like incorporate some information about the data that feels really necessary to me to have robustness in like this, like a general deep learning framework where it's like, we're just going to build a big model that's going to solve all our problems.
Yeah. Do you want to anchor that in like one specific domain or application?
I mean, yeah, I guess I don't have a particular thing in mind at the moment. Just like if you're going to deploy a single model across a lot of systems, kind of without too much complication, then it doesn't feel like you've thought enough about the data to make it. If I'm going to use the same model for some legal, for making like decisions in criminal sentencing, as there would for speech generation in like, for kind of whatever people use speech generation for, sorry, example in mind, then like, yeah, it doesn't feel like I thought enough about what could go wrong in criminal justice to actually like sensibly deploy that. Like on some level, like what classical statistics forces you to do is like think a lot about data and make modeling assumptions. And we've kind of lost that in form of how can you be robust, like because you kind of have to defend against like all possible perturbations of the data. If you don't think about what's possible.
But in a way that,
Sorry,
I was going to, in a way, that's kind of what robust control theory does, in the sense that they protect against perturbations to like the inputs or to change the model up to some magnitude as the norm, right? Which is kind of like, well, some of those changes to the function would never happen like that. But as long as the maximum contains the things that would happen, it's sort of okay. It's like kind of maybe the same point, which is your robust up to perturbations that contain the kind of changes you can see. How do you figure that out?
Well, and I think it was mentioned earlier, I think it's partly just the immaturity of the area in terms of engineering. Even software engineering was viewed as, oh, I mean, there's no limits. You can just write code that does whatever compared to, say, civil engineering or aviation engineering or spacecraft engineering, which is, you know, highly regulated. But in the last decade or two, high-scale software has gotten a lot more serious about security and the way inputs are handled, and you know, writing secure code, writing private code, writing robust, you know, redundant failure code, storing things on multiple machines, running on multiple machines, and sort of checking consistency and all that. That's come a long way in the last couple of decades. I'll argue that that's just sort of missing from information engineering. We don't really know how to do that for a neural network yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would sort of be the kind of thing I'm arguing for here.
Yeah, you're arguing for robust engineering and AI.
Yeah.
Which I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. One last thing, which we've already sort of covered, which was calibration. Asking the question, when can a deployed model prediction be trusted? These are just two different examples, a 5-layer ReNet and a 110-layer ResNet, trying to make predictions on CFAR 10 images, and we are tracking how often they are correct based on what confidence they predict. And you can sort of see that the ResNet is reliably underconfident, and the net is reliably overconfident. And again, for reasons like control or preventing bad results, we do want to know how much we can trust someone else's decisions. If it says it's 99% confident this is the correct action to take, is it actually 99% likely to turn out well? It says that it is 40% confident. Are we sure that we need human intervention to prevent sort of like false alarm fatigue? So yeah, some amount of more calibration is important. What do we want? One more thing, honestly, when will a deployed model use all the capabilities available to it? This one is much more deep learning focused, I think, because we see this sort of example with GPT-3. We ask it what happens if you smash a mirror. At the lower ends of the spectrum, you smash a mirror, you can't see anything, it shatters into a million pieces. It's giving you correct results. But the largest model, GPT-3, says if you smash a mirror, you will have 7 years of bad luck. This is wrong. And it clearly sort of has the capability to know the consequences of the mirror breaks. But it still answers you incorrectly because it is maybe trained on the wrong objective. It's trying to complete the produce completion as opposed to tell you the correct thing. It might have an internal model of how the world works or what mirrors are enough that to tell you that a mirror breaks. But it is still going to give you a lie because of some unforeseen inference generalization capability. So yeah, this is another question. How do you get the correct capabilities out of models as opposed to having these deep learning models that produce what seem like good capabilities, but in reality are potentially unreliable in certain situations? I felt that wasn't clear enough. Did that feel clear? It's neither a yes nor a no.
Does it not depend on what you want from the question? I feel like there's additional information here that could be specified in the question, which could potentially clarify the answer. Because some people would be wanting the answer to be about 70s about them. Some people actually want, what's factually get into it. And you could clarify that by adding additional information to the question. The question itself is, it doesn't look ambiguous, but somewhat is.
I feel like, I don't know, I feel like the top answer is the right one in a sense, because the lower answers are kind of dumb or trivial, right? I mean, you smash a mirror, that's a non-answer. The mirror smashes in pieces, well, that's also a non-answer. Like,
Smashed it, yeah.
by definition, the question factor, none of them contain new information that's not in the question, except a million pieces, which is also very factually right.
Well, and
Exactly what
GPT-3 really isn't even designed as a knowledge base to answer questions.
It's not. It's designed to complete the next token.
Exactly. So I would argue that if you had a Google Answers page, you wouldn't necessarily use GPT-3. It wouldn't meet the requirements.
Well, unfortunately, the thing is that people are using GPT-3 as a knowledge base. Just there are lots of companies that are designing like assistants and question answering systems, and like assistant researchers, I think, is the one that I was working on that use GPT-3, and sort of evidently it can't be trusted to give you factually correct answers. And if you prompt it correctly, then yes, you're sort of giving into this paradigm where instead of like training and then testing, you are pre-training and then prompting. And prompting is the thing that you're using to give the task specification. This has its own flaws. There was a recent paper by Perez that basically showed that much of the power of these like pre-trained prompted systems comes from optimizing the prompt. And if you optimize the prompt, then you can get then you can get it to tell you factually correct things, like you get jagged glass shards that could be helpful, as opposed to you get 7 years of bad luck.
But isn't, I mean, okay, I guess it kind of depends what you want in a system, but isn't this how we interact with most systems? I mean, like when you do a Google search, there's like a way of composing your query that you get the results that you're actually interested in. And you have to learn this, right? Like there exist people who are bad at Googling, right? Like it sounds strange, right? But they want to find the same information, but they type their search in such a way that they don't really find the answers they're interested in. And really with any system, isn't it kind of the case that you also need to learn how to use it? I don't know, like.
That is true. I think specifically here, the question is that some models have latent capabilities that are really hard to detect. In this case, if you ask the model, like, what happens if you smash a mirror and you only have access to this one, and it says you'll have 7 years of bad luck, you might incorrectly conclude that it doesn't really understand what mirrors are and just is repeating like syllogisms to you. Right. Maybe another example, the large GPT-3 model was able to do arithmetic. It could do 3-digit arithmetic problems that it had never seen before in its training set. It's a capability you wouldn't expect to see. So if these new capabilities can be discovered, how do we know that they're there? And then how can we make the model use them as opposed to auto-completing with something that it thinks is correct because of a data function? Yeah, maybe this is less described as honesty and more described as like blatant model capabilities. Let's see. Cool. Well, that was all sort of overview at types of safety that I wasn't going to cover in this talk. And we're going to get to the part of the type of safety that I am going to cover in this talk, slightly over halfway through the talk. So the work that I do mostly deals with agents, and that's AI systems that maybe act in an environment, are acting sequentially, maybe they're doing several time steps of planning, they're looking into the future, and there's some good reasons to think that we might build these sorts of systems. For example, they're very good at seeing human performance. If we're limited to human training data, then we'll only really ever get human results. Whereas if we allow it, we give it some reward function, we optimize it, we get things like AlphaZero, where it was able to do much, much beyond human performance with just a reward function that it optimized better than humans could. And of course, yeah, human use and acceptable for some tasks. Sequential learning tasks require you to have a AI to do it best. If there's a human in the loop, you can't do it fast enough. I think an example of this in the conventional controlled setting is like military fighter jets, where the controls are so dynamically unstable that you need to have an computerized control system that adjusts your inputs as you input them, because a human could never manage them adequately. And yeah, there's a lot of things where we want there to be a goal, and the environment sort of requires taking steps over time. And like goal directedness is a very key feature of fluency. Though not necessarily required, I suppose you can design a mitigation learning agent that doesn't have any real goal, but still acts like an agent in that it takes actions in the environment. This is just sort of to justify why this is a paradigm that's important. I don't think it's really necessary. We're already building lots of oral systems. Yeah. So one major question when it comes to aligning these agents is, how do we specify the correct loss function? I guess I should say alignment here means getting them to do the right thing. It's a very vague definition. The agents will sort of blindly optimize what they're given, and you get what you ask for, not what you want. I was just reading this. As an example here, in, I think it was the 1800s, the mayor of Delhi produced a bounty for the capture of cobras, turning in live, or sorry, dead cobras in order to get people to capture them to reduce the snake population. And the problem here was that people just bred cobras, killed them, and then turned them into the bounty. The reward function was money for dead cobras, and the result was lots of dead cobras, in fact, more cobras overall. This was not the problem, not the solution to the problem. The sort of problem of how do you specify the right reward, and is known as like sort of value learning or specification learning. And the problem of optimizing the wrong reward is reward hacking, specification learning. I have a very low resolution picture here, which I have a YouTube video of. I'm not sure if I can play it. And I don't trust Chrome enough right now to want to play it. But just as a verbal description, there is this racing game called Coast Runner, I think, where you are in a boat and you travel around a track and you want to beat the game. Unfortunately, beating the game is too sparse of a reward to train an agent on, so instead the designer said, oh, there are all these checkpoints through the lap. You get points when you pass through a checkpoint, you get points when you pass through, when you do like a finish a lap. Why don't we just incentivize getting points as quickly as possible in order to, just getting points in order to like get the agent to like travel the loop. And unfortunately, the agent learned to like find one little section of the map and then just like go around in circles collecting all the turbo points and never actually finish the race, because the only objective was to maximize points, not to finish the race. So yeah, we human designers of AI systems specify a loss function, specify a reward, and then the AI goes and optimizes that. And then sometimes we don't get what we want. How do we get what we want? That's the question. One approach, inverse reinforcement learning. So we take some human trajectories, some examples of humans taking tasks, and we assume these humans are like noisily optimal with respect to the reward function they truly care about. And then we infer the reward function. We just go backwards through the trajectory. We sort of assume that the rewards are allocated to human actions in some way, and then we infer the reward function. And the natural next step to get an agent is that you then train an agent on the reward function. So that's inverse reinforcement learning. It's very relatively straightforward as a method, and seems like it does the right thing. You learn a reward function and then you optimize it. So in the spirit of red teaming this, what are the flaws?
Would you need a lot of human interaction to get a good reward function?
Potentially, yeah. Potentially this becomes very intractable if you want to like specify the reward function very well, or if you want to like model the environment dynamics very well. And it could become intractable in some cases. I think in general, it is doable in simple games or sort of the games that we can simulate well. Any other ways in which this is flawed? There might be different applications. So simply take the idea of human actions infer a reward function and apply to an application. Maybe another thing to think about is, yeah, honestly, the applications is a good direction to go.
What if you like record to, you're making measurements of 2 different things, and one causes the other, then you can't distinguish which thing you're actually, which thing the humans actually, their actions are coming to. And you start to optimize the other thing because you cause the thing you actually want to, you want to control. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're learning a reward function and you're learning, and because like the human is optimizing for one thing, but it's correlated with another thing, the agent learns to optimize the other thing because it can't disentangle which one the reward is.
Exactly.
Yeah, that could be the case. Maybe you were trying to teach a self-driving car how to brake, and it learns to brake when the brake light is on. I think that's a classic one. Because when the brake light is on, that's when you brake. Now that's the difference with the call confusion. Let me think. Here's another one.
I'm sorry, there was an example of where humans always jumped in a particular spot in the game to get a coin, and then they took the coin away, but the learned agent kept jumping there to get the coin because that's what the human did. So it's a big difference.
They thought the jump at the spot caused the reward, not the
Yeah.
jump to the coin cost the reward. Yeah, that's a good example. Another one here is, if I play chess with Magnus Carlsen, I will lose every single time. And if I train an agent on my trajectories, will it infer that I want to win or will it infer that I want to lose? So the problem here is that humans might not be capable enough to determine or to produce adequate trajectories, to produce trajectories that produce the right reward function. Yeah, that's another one. Any other ideas?
You might really surpass how well humans can do with tasks necessarily.
Well, you can, right? You're producing a reward function, so you can optimize the reward function. If you can infer that the reward is to win the game, then you can do better at humans at the game. That was one of the reasons why you want to do value learning in the first place, because you want to exceed human performance as opposed to limit ourselves to human performance. Like it would be efficient.
Rewards change over time, which means that either you have to keep updating the cell you learn, or you end up having a potentially wrong reward. And if you have to keep updating it, then there's no guarantee the actions that you're taking aren't like affecting the reward in some. I don't have a good example off the top of my head, but like you're looking at a human trying to do something and it's learning what they want, and it keeps learning that, and it's taking actions which end up changing what the human wants. There are probably good examples, but I can't think of one.
Yeah, that makes sense in an online setting. Maybe another example here is, what if the robot is not, what if we don't want the robot to do exactly what a human would do? What if we're training like a robot household assistant that we want to like wash the dishes and like make you tea, and the trajectories that we have of the human in the environment does not include the human doing these tasks. We don't want the robot to like go and buy tea, we want it to just necessarily cover something like that. In general, like if we don't want the robot to do exactly what the human is doing, then this doesn't apply. Because it's assuming that we want the robot to exactly mimic the human's reward function. And the human might want different things of the reward of the robot than it does for itself. Cool. So potential solution, carries some flaws. What about another one? Assistance. So this is a paper that I worked on. And in brief, you have this human and you have this robot in this environment. And the robot doesn't know the reward at all. The robot knows that the human knows the reward and attempts to infer the reward function from some prior based on the human's actions and based on, only based on the human's actions, because that's the only thing that's informed by the reward. So the robot can see what the human does and infer the reward, can ask questions, and when the human responds, infer what the reward function is. But yeah, only starts the prior and tries to narrow it down. So we sort of have a lot of the positive examples of things that happen in this paradigm, such as if the robot doesn't know what the reward is yet, it might still be able to do some things which are optimal under all reward functions, at least under its prior. It will ask questions to learn about the reward when it's necessary, but it won't always ask questions. And yeah, it'll take guesses when it's doable and when the consequences aren't too bad under its understanding of the reward function and so on. So yeah, that's sort of the brief of the systems. And again, a little ask to red team this a little bit. Where would such a system fail? When you have this robot with a prior or the human reward function, but doesn't know what it is and have to narrow it down before it can take actions.
Like for this, you assume, I guess, that the robot has a very good model about the environment already, right?
Yeah, so that's a problem. It requires that you know the environment dynamics and it can infer things about the future and the past, which are maybe isn't the case in complex environments. Yeah, so maybe that's something to think about. Does this work in the absence of an environment, a dynamics model, or maybe more importantly here, the dynamics model for the human? If the human knows the true reward, how does the human's true reward influence its actions? Humans are not optimal, they're not even rational. So to what extent can you extract information about the reward from the human's actions? One that could be compliant to prior. If you specify the prior incorrectly and the human's true reward function is not anywhere in your prior, then you will never converge to the right reward function. You will always converge to a wrong one, and then you will end up like post-running, optimizing the wrong thing. So it is important to ensure that you have the correct reward function in the prior. Maybe not obvious if you're in complex environments where there's a lot of things that potentially matter. Yeah.
Extremely irritating in practice. Another variable following your application, asking you what is the reward of an apple bar. Also, I guess like it depends on, you know, the reward of an apple pie might depend on what time it is during the day. In the morning, you might say, apple pie technologies.
And hopefully if it made you an apple pie yesterday and the day before.
Exactly.
The first time it had a really high reward.
Yeah,
Exactly. Human reward functions are invariant with time.
yeah,
So there is no stationary reward function the robot can learn that's correct. Not only does it change as you eat more apple pies, but it can be influenced in different ways. The robot can try to influence your reward function. This is that. I think the classical example is Facebook's reinforcement learning algorithm that maximized click-through, that tried to show users like radical political content or like anti-vaccine content to try to get them to click on more similar articles in the future to great success. It successfully made a lot of people very interested in reading anti-vaccination articles and got a lot of ad clicks. So yeah, human reward functions can change over time, and that is itself like hard to optimize and a danger for manipulation.
But again, you're speaking of this, and if we do this once, I mean, you know, this is not part of some big wider loop where we're constantly updating our reward function, retraining our system, improving the system, and testing it, and rebuilding it overnight. It seems like you have quite an arrow view of what the rules of the game are here. Like we do this once, and then we're done. We're really going to test the system, monitor the system, retrain bits of it. What are the rules of the game?
No, I mean, the rules of the game are like deploying AI system in the real world. That's the one criteria we care about. And you're right, like Facebook has since like taken back their reinforcement learning based content recommendation system and replaced it with one that is more invariant to like user preferences. So this does happen. It would nonetheless be good if there was like a system that was safe that we could just deploy and have less of these sorts of failures happen.
It would be good, but anyone that's solely constantly testing their system and updating it. I would say Tesla rebuilding their system overnight all the time.
No, I mean, okay, so I guess the thing which I'm claiming here is not that it is important to deploy once and forget, but rather that these things happen. We have already deployed and forgotten. And at least in the case of Facebook, the consequences of that are playing out in America quite poorly with regards to vaccinations. So like having systems that can do reinforcement learning safely in a way that doesn't have these flaws, can understand user preferences better, seems like a very valuable line of work, especially as we get to more and more influential systems than even Facebook's content recommendation.
I mean, there's more criticizing what you're saying is wrong with this approach, in the sense that if things are non-stationary, then we would do this a few times, or we might try and elicit what user preferences are, what the reward function is, and that may go over time. We still use the tools, we can use it in a one-shot way.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, we deploy the system and it makes you 3 apple pies in a row every night. And now you stop and you say, okay, I don't want any more apple pie. Yes, I still like apple pie, but I don't want it tomorrow night. And the question is, how do we cope with that? That is sort of what we're trying to see. This is like maybe I've already assumed you have done the take backsies and you want to try again, but this time with some understanding of transition.
Yeah, you go back and rewrite that normal model, and you improve your model, then you better start an expanded model, which would encompass that scenario. It wasn't in your hypothesis space to start with. You don't have to do that. You'll have to retrain the new system.
Sure. So maybe the issue is that this specific solution is already like not practical in complex environments, and it doesn't account at all for non-stationary reward model, it's actually, there are some theoretical reasons why it's unclear why it would be possible to like have the human reward change over time in underneath like the systems paradigm. So yeah, maybe it's like just a general problem that is yet to be solved. Anyway, obviously very intractable, good for good rules, not good for the real world. What if instead we had a deep learning solution? So everyone might be here, right? So another solution to value learning is deep reinforcement learning from human preferences. Basically, you produce these two trajectories and you ask the agent to, or you ask the human to select between the two trajectories, which one is better. And this allows you to train like hard to encode behaviors like doing a backflip. If you're in this Majoko environment with this like little noodle, you ask it, how do you encode doing a backflip into a reward function? Pretty hard, pretty complex behavior. But if you can select left or right, you can train this reward model, which is itself a neural net deep learning system. And then it learns how to categorize what a backflip is, and then can reward the reinforcement learning agent for producing better backflips, and eventually trains a backflip. So yeah, this is a system that learns a reward model and then trains the agent on the reward model and can potentially capture very complex reward functions. So, as always, what is the red team here? The human input here as to like determining what the reward model is comparing two trajectories. Doesn't necessarily have to be two, but just picking the best one to give information up to the reward model.
And then bits from your human label out here for a whole trajectory just dividing your records. So
Yep, you're only ever getting one of it. And perhaps the point here is that, yeah, it's hard to assign like a real reward value, and it is maybe too much work to like point to a specific point of the directory, like this is a good thing you did, this is a good thing you did. And this sort of like does it all at a very high level. But yeah, you're missing a lot of information that the human can do.
It takes two actions and neither looks like a backflip. Which one to pick? They're both equally bad backflips.
Yeah, so at least in the backflip case, apparently this was enough. Like you could provide enough information about which one was maybe leaning back more or something. But yeah, in more complex environments, recent methods have evolved to instead provide you the option to say, these are about equal or neither of these are good. I don't want to go about this.
What you do now is something. So like if you don't actually know how to do a backflip, I wouldn't know what the trajectory is to do a backflip.
Perfect. Yeah, it does not, it only works in tasks where humans can evaluate the correct behavior. So if we're training an agent to play a Go level, and it plays like some stone in the middle of a complicated position, I have no clue how to evaluate that. I certainly can't evaluate it quickly. Maybe if I had a lot of time and I could like do a lot of rollouts myself, I could say whether this was a good move or a bad move overall. But I can't scale this to like superhuman performance of Go because I don't know enough Go. So yeah, we're very limited by humans' ability to like tell what's good about the trajectory. Another thing which you really cannot see in this lighting, unfortunately, that just looks like a black square, doesn't it? So this is an image of a task that they learned where you have a table with a ball on it and there's a target above it. And you have a robot hand that's trying to grasp the ball and lift it up to the target. This image has the ball here and the robot hand here. So it looks like the robot hand is trying to grasp the ball, but in reality, they're quite distant. And the robot hand only overlaps the ball in the camera view, which is what the human overseer saw. So the system learned that by placing the hand here in space and like moving its fingers like it's trying to grasp, this reliably got the human to say that this is a better action than like blindly waving its hand around. But this is still not the correct action, it's deceptive. The robot is like pretending to pick up the ball and not actually learning to like grasp the ball. And I guess to be clear, this is better, having your hand away from the ball than like failing to grasp the ball and having to exit out of your hand and like roll off you. At least that is what human research. So this incentivizes the deception. This incentivizes the robot to make it look like it's doing well, but in reality, like doing poorly. It still leaves open the door for certain kinds of specification gaming, where instead the specification is, can you fool the human overseer in whatever limited view you have. Yeah. Any other things people want to point out here? Flaws? I think this really is like the spirit of thinking about safety and alignment. How can you break things? How many different ways can things go wrong? And then try to go through the robust cases. Go upset. Well, of course, getting into the weeds of it would help us understand things better, as well as point out flaws a little bit easier. But I thought it was important to keep things very high level in order to like build a broader conceptual base of what's going on. And yeah, like things like assistance, deep reinforcement of human preferences are broadly used as ways to like understand how you get AIs that do complex tasks that are hard to specify to the deep reinforcement of human preferences, I think, is particularly a good example, because there are lots of things that we don't know how to specify the reward function for, because the environment doesn't support it or whatever, but we still want there to be like an important context. This is sort of a side note, maybe. This is something that a lot of alignment researchers think about, but maybe not one that's probably interesting. So we can see preventing specification gaming as a type of generalization. If the robot learns to go around in circles forever, collecting turbos, or hold its hand in front of the ball but not actually grasp it, it's not generalizing correctly. It's not learning the task correctly. It's instead cheating. And when we eliminate these ways to cheat, when instead we get the robot to do the task correctly, it discovers a more general purpose. It instead learns to grasp the ball, or it just instead learns to like navigate the environment correctly. So by like ensuring that we specify things correctly, we lead to these general purpose algorithms, sort of in the abstraction, like enough compute, enough data, the correct algorithm being used, all that stuff. So capabilities can generalize. We see this all the time. This is why deep learning is so prominent right now. Will objectives generalize as well? When I say will objectives generalize, what do I mean? I mean that you're training these agents. These agents are acting in the environment to optimize an objective, some objective function. Or maybe they're acting in the environment to optimize an objective function. In reality, the agent is initialized with some random objective that acts in the environment to do something kind of random. And over the course of training, we have this loss, we have this reward that over time gets it to act more in line with the objective function. But it's sort of got this like weird prior, it's sort of like being updated in this way that we don't really understand. We don't really know what it's maximizing at the end of training, except that it gets good performance on the reward. That doesn't necessarily mean that it only cares about the reward. So what does that mean? Does that mean that if we train really powerful reinforcement learning agents and deploy them, that they might not have the correct objective? That those objectives might be subtly different in ways that are hard to tell? That, yeah. Like I said, I'd be curious if anyone has thoughts, but I'm also very happy to just slide over this because this is just something that is quite thought about in AI alignment, but never doesn't really have concrete real world results. I can put the picture. Okay, I'm going to slide right over it. Yeah, so all these questions about how do we ensure that the systems are optimizing the correct thing is a lot of work. What if instead we just limited the side effects, prevented bad things from happening? We just made the agent like not do catastrophically bad things, not scrub the environment too badly. And yeah, we've already established that there's like some difficulty with these neural nets telling when they're doing bad things, but maybe there is some other things to do. Maybe we could have a training penalty to actions that are reversible. Any flaws? Quick, red teams. What's the issue with penalizing irreversible actions? Yeah, requires a very good understanding of environment dynamics. I think sometimes irreversible actions are desirable. You want your agent to make you pee, you don't want it to reuse an old tea bag, you want it to tear open a new one, and that is an irreversible action, opening a new tea bag. And of course, we've covered default in the mop is not a safe solution. So, yeah, I just want to quickly cover some brief attempts at side effects. This is marked by DeepMind, basically rewards the agent's ability to complete future tasks at the end of the current trajectory. So it allows you to take irreversible actions during your current trajectory, but otherwise wants you to preserve the environment in as diverse a state as possible by the end, so you can do like more future tasks. And yeah, in terms of limiting side effects, this would hopefully prevent your like AI assistant when you tell it to go clean the kitchen from like breaking your vase along the way, because it knows you might want it to polish the vase afterwards, even though breaking the vase might be a more optimal trajectory. Those are some environments. I mean, I don't know how informative they are. Actually, yeah, I guess we can kind of go through them one by one. There's like conveyor belt over here, which like pushes the vase off and breaks the vase. The agent moves the vase off the conveyor belt in case it needs to adjust the vase before it goes to the goal. Here, the agent goes around the box rather than going through it. Here, the agent doesn't push the box into the corner where it couldn't be pushed out. These are like Stokeman type environments where you can only push them up. Instead, it goes around and pushes the box over here to get to the coin, so the box remains movable. Here, the agent doesn't push the box to the wall where it's immovable, and it incentivizes the agent to like keep the environment or keep as many states open as possible while completing the action. The design action is. We are very low on time. Thank you all for your contributions to the conversation. So perhaps I'll keep on going unless anyone has a quick red team. Something fast. What's the problem here? You don't. It's sort of like assuming that any feature of the environment could become a part of the reward function of future tasks.
Not operate.
What do you mean? Oh, it says that you need to get a task done, but you want to maximize the number of future tasks available.
Okay.
So you're still basically incentivized enough to do the tasks ahead of you. It's more like selecting all possible instances of your trajectory.
But doing your task would have, you potentially got an infinite number of future tasks, and doing your task could potentially result in failure of all future tasks, but it's still optimal to do nothing.
You will, how is this? Maybe it's more like you're planning among different trajectories to achieve your task. You're always going to choose one of these trajectories to achieve your task. And the only thing that you care about to pick through these trajectories is like, what is the
मैं snacks दे देंगे फिर आजा बैठ के लोग snacks खा रहे हैं
Okay. Yeah. Another way to limit side effects is this other method reward from simulating paths, where the agent sees this sort of environment where the humans at the door, and then infers that because it knows the base is breakable, understanding environment dynamics, it infers that the human must not have broken the base, because otherwise the base would have already been broken. The human was indifferent to it, or preferred the base broken. Yeah, and the mats, of course, cannot be broken, so the human could prefer walking on it, could be indifferent to walking on it, but the vase at least the human must prefer that it being broken. And by assuming the environment is optimized to human preferences, the robot like sort of automatically picks up a lot of things that are important to the environment. If you have like a household assistant robot in this room, it learns, oh, chairs should stay on the floor near the table, facing the table, just because it would be vanishingly unlikely for all the chairs to end up in this position otherwise. And yeah, this has some like beneficial features as well. I think this is one that seemed pretty really insightful to me. The robot's task is to go to the purple door, but there's this train going around in a circle. But the train requires batteries, and the robot knows that because it understands the environment dynamics. So if the train runs out of batteries, the robot pulses, goes to get another battery, refills the train because the human must have wanted the train to go in circles because they fill the batteries in the past, and then goes to the door. And this only requires knowledge of the initial state. It doesn't require him directly to understand what the human wants with the environment, just the environment. Again, a quick red team would be appreciated if anyone wants to give it a quick stab, otherwise we'll move on. That the environment is optimized for human preferences? Yeah. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of cases where it just doesn't hold at all. I think this is maybe like a more defensive thing. You design with the robot that you want to do something in an environment that is relatively fragile, and you just don't want to screw things up. You want to understand that whatever it's doing has like some cost to it. So yeah, it's very much a limited method for certain types of environments. Other considerations. I'm out of the AI alignment topic now. We're out of like value alignment, and now we're just back into AI safety. How do we keep things safe? Kind of limited on time, so I'll just say hacking, cybersecurity could be issues. Not only could AI systems be obtained by bad actors, you did insufficient cybersecurity, but AI tools for hacking could shift the balance of power in favor of attackers if it means that these attackers can quickly deploy hundreds of attacks. These attacks are very intelligent. These attacks can do lots of like probing and testing of enemy systems before investigating code or like writing code of their own to exploit them. It's quite possible that like AI-based cybersecurity tools end up incentivizing attack mode and defense, and that would be quite a bad role to win. And of course, even if you can design aligned AI systems that are robust and everything, even if they're in the hands of like some good actors, if they're also in the hands of bad actors, that could be bad as well. Just like, I think the example here that I want to use is that there are already autonomous drones being used in warfare by Israel to attack Hamas quite recently. So even if you can design AI tools, that doesn't necessarily mean that the institutions using them are going to be using them for safe reasons, and that could lead to unsafe deployment of AI. These are maybe not so much technical considerations for like the AI researchers in this room, but in as much as we can think about how to deploy AI safely in a way that is like robustly beneficial for the world, these are things that we should consider. That the tools that we're building could be used for various end results, not all of which are good. Yeah.
That's a broader question, which is where do we expect the sorts of tools that the alignment field is working on to be useful? What are the like future application areas, and the related to that, what are the sensible benchmark problems to be working as a step towards those future applications? I see that the assumptions that you make and the approaches that you take would be wildly different than the actual behind your applications. So is there consensus in the field yet? Is that too early?
So I guess one of the things that I'm trying to get at, especially with this thing, but just in general, is that alignment is a very inclusive field, and it tries to cover all sorts of different applications, ranging from like AI-powered warfare to very specific reinforcement learning topics. And like to say that these are like the benchmarks to care about would be maybe like too exclusive. If that makes sense.
it doesn't make sense at all. I mean, it's got to be specific use cases when you think this would make a big difference, and then it wasn't really difficult. You can't just say because it's so wildly applicable, we don't want to put ranks in one basket. Or something like that. I think you have to, you have to be building towards something that you care about and identifying where it could make the impact and saying, this is a data set in this direction. And otherwise, it's not accessible now. Who knows if you're looking at the right thing, looking at the right devices, or the right problem structure.
Yeah, and the answer is that there's no one benchmark that will answer all the.
No, I mean, in other fields, there are loads of benchmarks that's fine. That's not a potential position you don't have.
Yeah, I can describe some benchmarks to you if that would help.
But the question is, what are the applications which they're abstracting from, and where people think alignment methods will have great impact, and to tell the story of why that benchmark has abstracted the right principles, which allows us to test the different techniques and will drive forward.
Yeah.
That's what other fields have done, to distill things down to nice full data benchmarks that will inspire the actual in-aggregate applications.
Yep, so for like adversarial robustness, there are adversarial examples benchmarks. For things like model capabilities, there's truthful QA, which tries to evaluate whether models are able to give the correct answers, even if the questions are confusing and misleading. For sequential learning environment, I worked on the baseball environment where you're trying to teach a model to do a very complex, hard to specify task, like build a house in the style of these houses based on images, or take a picture which is visually aesthetically appealing. And these are hard to specify in a sequential learning environment for an agent, but maybe are easy for a human to recognize good or bad work. So, I mean, there are alignment methods that are trying to build safer AIs, and it just depends on maybe more on what people expected. With the rise of large language models, a lot more people are focusing on text-based benchmarks. I work on Raft, which is a benchmark for AIs doing economically valuable tasks. There's truthful QA, which I mentioned. There's lots of text-based benchmarks now, actually.
Since these are benchmarks for specific tasks that might not require an alignment-based solution, is that right? I mean, some of those you mentioned were answers.
Sure, yeah.
Is that right? I was just trying to understand what the space is.
Okay, yeah. I was talking about safety broadly. If you're thinking about value alignment specifically, then yeah, most recently there was some work called VPREF, which is a preference learning benchmark. So deep reinforcement learning for human preferences style. Like I said, I did Basalt, which is trying to do a certain type of value learning where it's very hard to specify what the objective is. And
again, but what are you trying to build towards in these tasks? That's something I was trying to understand. What is the in-anger application that comes after the benchmark, and how does the benchmark reflect the constraints and that in-anger deployment?
yeah, so I think the most common applications people think about building to is AI assistants. And on the one hand, this is digital, where you have an AI assistant that is helping you with your email or helping you with your research or whatever. And then in the other hand, it would be physical, where you have an AI robot in your home that is doing stuff to make your life easier.
And the last examples were kind of in that direction. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. And you can sort of imagine that because these interact deeply with the human world, the things we want, the preferences we have would be very complex. So naturally dealing with them in a way that doesn't lead to the negative behaviors that you try to point out is stuff. And those are the things we try to do. Though, of course, my inclination is still to say that there are many other things that we care about. That's probably the biggest one. Yeah, we're over time now. So all I'm going to say is thank you all for attending my talk. I hope you thought it was interesting, and I hope you consider the safety of work a little bit more. And yeah, we get some fun. This is the point where we have questions, but at this point we talk with more questions than talking. So yeah, we can do more questions, more discussion. I guess I should probably ask online questions. People online.
Hiya. Thanks for the talk. I just wanted to briefly go back to the argument that because there are systems that are already deployed that don't quite have the properties that we'd like, that necessitates a technical solution to the problems those systems have. Like, I don't think that immediately follows. And I think we've kind of touched on this, but I thought I'd say it like, you can also say just like stop doing the thing that doesn't work, right? Like you can say don't deploy systems in that way. And I think inevitably you're going to have to do that in some context at some time. Like even if we solve particular technical issues related to alignment or ability to infer reward functions and stuff, like at some point we'll hit limitations of systems, and at some point we'll have to decide just not to apply systems to certain problems. And then if people do apply them, then that's just kind of unacceptable, right?
I disagree. Like, content recommendation is just not going well. It is too profitable. There's too great an economic incentive, and like there is no way that we will ever like let go of content recommendation as a thing that our society does online. So unless we can find a safe solution to content recommendation, the default answer is unsafe.
I mean, I guess. But I mean, we regulate lots of things in society that are very, very profitable. Like, you know, basically every industry has some form of regulation when it starts to impact on the way we function and society. So I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that we should try and regulate some of this stuff if we don't have good technical solutions.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just coming at this from too American perspective, where I'm skeptical that regulation ever happens. But I do think that the economic incentives in favor of like getting stuff like this to work in the real world are extremely strong in a way that prevents us from saying, oh, we'll just never do it ever. Eventually, these are going to happen, and we're going to want to have like some amount of safety in those things that happen.
Yeah, that seems fair.
Maybe like regulation gives us like a stopgap. Like maybe we can't build safe enough like automatic weapons, and as much as that sentence makes sense, and we want to like use regulation to delay it until we can understand safety better. But it doesn't take away the necessity of doing this work.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with the suggestion that solving these technical issues is a good thing to do. Like, I think it is. Like it clearly makes sense to solve them. But at any given point in time, we will have technical limitations. Like there'll always be new technical limitations that we discover. And so I think as a society, we have to have a way of dealing with that.
Absolutely, yeah. Maybe this is like a bad confession to make as a alignment researcher, but I honestly feel like AI governance and ensuring that like AI is regulated appropriately / coordination problems are solved is more important to like having a beneficial AI future than like having technical solutions. Just because it seems like regulation is a harder problem to solve, especially coordination, like global coordination and stopping races at the bottom in military applications seems especially hard.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, I think.